Uncooked rice under raw pork chops, dry egg noodles drinking undiluted cream of mushroom, everything sealed under foil while the oven does all the work, and nobody wrote any of it down. The woman who knew is gone. Here are 30 cheap dump-and-bake dinners that fed entire lives, one covered dish at a time. Uncooked long-grain rice goes in first, dry, straight from the bag, no pre-rinsing. That was the rule. And if you had to ask why, you were not there yet. Bone-in pork chops lay on top, seasoned with salt, onion powder, and paprika, and a can of cream of mushroom soup thinned with 1 can of water went over all of it. Foil tight, 350, 1 hour covered and 15 uncovered to brown the top. The rice absorbed every drop of pork fat and broth, pulling flavor up through the grain the way only sealed, slow heat allows, and the chops came out falling toward the bone. Nobody called this a recipe. It was just the Tuesday answer when the budget was low. Through the 1950s and 60s, home economists promoted pork and rice casseroles as the most cost-efficient complete protein a household could produce. Meat, starch, and fat in one sealed dish, no moisture wasted. Today, the chops come out of an air fryer and the rice is instant, and the patience of that sealed hour is gone. She never diluted the soup. That was the thing most people got wrong when they tried to copy it. They thinned the can, and the noodles came out swimming instead of coated. The real method: bone-in chicken thighs straight into the casserole dish, dry egg noodles scattered around them without pre-cooking, and the cream of mushroom soup poured undiluted, the whole thick can, over the top, then cover tight. By the time the oven finished, the noodles had pulled up every bit of that condensed soup and the chicken skins rendered fat. Campbell's began publishing casserole recipes from their condensed soups in 1941, and this dump-and-bake logic became the foundation of how a generation of women fed families without measuring and without writing anything down for whoever came after. You can follow the method exactly. Whatever she added, the decision to leave the skin on, the extra crack of pepper before the foil went down, went with her, and no amount of trying will bring it fully back. The smell hit the hallway before you reached the kitchen. Kielbasa and sauerkraut in a hot oven produce a sharp, smoky smell that is not polite and not quiet. Central European immigrant families brought kielbasa into American working-class neighborhoods in the early 20th century. Polish, Slovak, Czech households in mill towns from Pennsylvania to Ohio, and the combination of smoked sausage with fermented cabbage and potato was centuries old before it ever crossed an ocean. The method is simple: kielbasa coins, drained sauerkraut, chunked potatoes, brown sugar, mustard, oil, all tossed and spread across one pan. 400 degrees, 30 minutes. The brown sugar tames the fermented bite, the potato soaks up sausage fat, and the whole thing goes from pungent and sharp to sweet and tender. Precisely why this dish outlasted the neighborhoods that invented it. The mill towns emptied. The kielbasa stayed. Stuffed bell peppers were a Depression-era solution to making ground beef and rice feel like more than ground beef and rice. You halved the peppers and they became free vessels, grown in the backyard or bought for pennies. And the same modest filling suddenly had shape and occasion. Raw ground beef mixed with uncooked rice, onion, salt, and tomato sauce, packed into the pepper halves, stood upright in a baking dish with a half-inch of water and more sauce poured over the top. Covered at 350, the steam inside did all the work. Rice cooked from trapped moisture, beef set firm, the pepper wall softened to tender. During the 1930s, when beef cost around 18 cents a pound and garden peppers came free all summer, this was the dish that made a weeknight feel like a real meal. Your grandmother may have served 2 halves with a glass of milk and nothing else. That was enough. She knew it was, and she set the table the same way regardless. Before a mandolin appeared in any kitchen you ever stood in, there was a sharp knife and patient slicing, because the thinner the potato, the more surface there was to absorb the sauce, and the more surface, the better the dish. Ham and scalloped potatoes did not come from a cookbook. They came from the Monday after Easter, when half a bone-in ham still sat in the refrigerator. Thin sliced potatoes first, diced ham and sliced onion, a second potato layer, then a simple roux sauce, butter and flour, then whole milk whisked until thick, salt and black pepper, covered low for an hour, uncovered for the last 20 minutes to brown. The rule: if the knife passed through the top layer without resistance, it was done. No thermometer, just the knife. By the 1940s and 50s, this was one of the most reproduced casseroles in Midwestern home economics programs, a model of cost-efficient protein extension that turned a weekend ham into a weeknight centerpiece without either losing dignity. It sounds like a mistake until you eat it. Apricot jam and dry onion soup mix poured over raw chicken pieces and nothing else. No broth, no extra seasoning. The jam melts and spreads thin across the skin, and the dehydrated onion blooms in the moisture the meat releases. By the 40-minute mark, the dish has lacquered itself, the jam reducing to something close to a restaurant glaze, the chicken underneath bronze and pull-apart tender. The sweet and savory logic, fruit with poultry balanced by salt, is as old as medieval European cooking. But nobody at the counter with a jar of Smuckers and a packet of Lipton was thinking about that. They were thinking about dinner, and what they landed on tasted like more effort than it was. The dish arrived in American kitchens through the 1970s and 80s, when shelf-stable condiments made complicated-tasting meals possible without anything being fresh. Open two things, pour them over chicken, and sit down to something that looked like you meant it. She saved the cream of celery for pork. That was the division she had settled on. Cream of mushroom went with chicken, cream of celery went with pork. And if you used the wrong one, she would notice and say nothing, and you would know. Thick-cut pork chops into the dish without browning, only a light salt, the undiluted cream of celery spread over each chop like a blanket. Dried onion flakes, paprika, foil tight. Baked at 325 for 90 minutes, low enough that the connective tissue dissolved and the collagen seeped into the soup until it thickened toward gravy. The pork chops sold today are leaner and dry out at that temperature, which is part of why nobody makes this the way she made it. The other part is simpler. She is gone. The unwritten rule about which soup went with which meat went with her, and nobody thought to ask until it was already too late. The secret was the raw beef. Recipes that had you brown the ground beef first missed the point. The logic depended on the fat rendering directly into the macaroni and tomato sauce as everything cooked together, binding the pasta in the drippings. Dry, uncooked elbow macaroni first, then raw ground beef crumbled over it, then canned diced tomatoes, then beef broth, just enough to submerge the pasta, then shredded cheddar across the surface. Tight foil, 350, 45 minutes, then uncovered for 10 more to set the cheese. Campbell's published an emergency dinner pamphlet in the 1950s built on this exact principle. Raw starch and raw protein combined with liquid in a sealed dish, which became the organizing idea of American post-war convenience cooking. The broth turns the macaroni translucent where it has not yet absorbed. The beef fat marbles through the pasta, and the cheddar goes slightly crisp at the edges. You pull back the foil and the kitchen smells like a diner in 1957. Red beans and rice on Monday was not a recipe in New Orleans, it was a calendar fact. Monday was wash day, requiring hours of labor, so Monday dinner had to take care of itself. Beans into the pot in the morning, smoked sausage added by noon, rice going in late, everything collapsing into a thick sauce with very little oversight. The oven version carries the same logic. Soaked dried kidney beans, sliced smoked sausage, long grain rice, and spiced chicken broth, cayenne, garlic powder, a bay leaf, covered at 325 for 2 hours. The sausage bleeds smoke into the broth, the rice absorbs from below, and the beans thicken the liquid until what started as separate components becomes something close to gumbo. The Monday red beans tradition is documented to the mid-19th century in New Orleans and was common throughout Gulf Coast African-American households where smoked pork and dried legumes were the most affordable proteins available year-round. The dish does not need watching. It just needs time. Cheesy chicken and hash brown casserole arrived when the freezer section became a pantry. Frozen shredded hash browns, the bag in the bottom of the freezer since the last big breakfast, were the entire starch, tumbled into a dish still partly frozen, then covered with shredded rotisserie chicken, sour cream, cream of chicken soup, shredded cheddar, and salt. No pre-cooking, no thawing, no browning. $3.50 for an hour. The hash browns cooked in steam from the sour cream and soup. The chicken absorbed the potato fat, and the cheddar went crispy at the edges. Through the 1970s, as frozen foods became standard pantry items, this assembly cooking replaced the labor of peeling and slicing that earlier potato casseroles required. She probably learned it from a church cookbook or the back of the Ore-Ida bag, and once she did, she never went back to fresh potatoes. That version, the easy one done in 10 minutes flat, is the one you remember, and she is not here to make it anymore. If you grew up in Texas, this dish required no occasion. It appeared in a 9x13 pan at every church supper and gathering from the 1960s onward. King Ranch chicken has a murky origin that the actual King Ranch in South Texas has always declined to claim. But by the time it spread through community cookbooks and church pamphlets across the state, it had become one of the defining one-dish meals of Texas home cooking. Torn corn tortillas go in a loose layer. Not stacked tight, they need room to absorb. Shredded chicken and a mixture of cream of chicken soup, cream of mushroom soup, Rotel diced tomatoes with green chilies, and sour cream go over that. Another tortilla layer, another filling layer, then cheddar and Monterey Jack across the top. $3.50, 45 minutes. The Rotel is the key. The green chili heat cutting through the sour cream and double soup, making the whole dish taste more deliberate than a collection of cans has any right to. Chicken divan began as the signature dish of the Divan Parisian restaurant in New York City's Chatham Hotel, created by a chef named Anthony Lagasse in the early 20th century. Layered chicken and broccoli in a rich cream sauce served as the restaurant's centerpiece. By the late 1950s, home cooks had rebuilt it from what was on hand: frozen broccoli, leftover chicken, cream of chicken soup, mayonnaise, lemon juice, a teaspoon of curry powder, and cheddar across the top. The restaurant version called for a scratch bechamel. The home version needed a can opener and 30 minutes, and it tasted as though someone had genuinely tried. Frozen broccoli in one layer, cooked chicken over that, the soup and mayonnaise mixture poured over everything, cheddar on top, $3.50 until golden and bubbling. The curry powder is the thing most people skip, which is why their version never quite lands. She did not skip it. She knew what a single teaspoon did to a cream sauce, added it without measuring, and you never knew it was there until she was not making it anymore. Ground beef and tomato soup casserole was one of the original soup-a-sauce shortcuts that Campbell's Test Kitchen popularized through the 1950s. The moment a can of condensed tomato soup became not a soup at all, but a braising liquid, a sauce. Raw ground beef went into a casserole first, broken into loose chunks without browning, and over it went a can of condensed tomato soup, Worcestershire, sliced onion, and a pinch of garlic powder. Covered and baked at $3.50 for 45 minutes, the beef released its fat into the soup, and the tomato condensed and darkened, going from the thin orange of the can to something richer with a slow, savory backbone. Served over mashed potatoes or white bread, it tasted like someone had been tending a pot all afternoon when nobody had touched it since it went into the oven. The can of tomato soup started at 10 cents in the 1940s and changed how a generation understood what a sauce could be. Not a starting point, but the whole answer. Nobody outside the South knew what poppy seed chicken was, and that was part of how you knew you were in the right kitchen. Cooked chicken, shredded, never cubed, went into a baking dish, then a mixture of sour cream and cream of chicken soup poured over it, smooth and thick. Over the top went a full sleeve of crushed Ritz crackers mixed with melted butter and a tablespoon of poppy seeds pressed lightly into the cracker surface, baked until the crust went deep gold and the cream filling was bubbling at the edges. The poppy seeds are not for flavor. They are for texture and identity, and anyone who skips them has never made this the right way. The recipe circulated through Southern church suppers and community cookbooks throughout the 1960s, passed hand to hand without a printed name. She made it every time someone in the congregation was sick or grieving or had a new baby. You ate it at her table and never thought to write it down, and when she stopped bringing it, nobody could remember what had gone into it. If poppy seed chicken was the dish of celebration, canned salmon over potatoes was the dish of Tuesday. The night the budget had nothing left and the pantry made the decision. A can of pink salmon, bones and all, because the bones were soft and wasting, then was not done. Mixed with a beaten egg, cracker crumbs and dried dill, shaped into loose patties and laid over thin sliced raw potatoes and onion in a covered baking dish. A splash of milk at the bottom, foil tight, an hour at 325. The potatoes cooked in the steam, the salmon patties held their shape, and the dill rose through the whole dish the way dried herbs released in long baking always do. Not sharp, but present. Canned salmon became a wartime budget staple during the 1940s when beef and chicken were rationed, and households that found this combination during those years kept it long after the ration books were gone and the reason for the dish had passed. In New England, they called it American chop suey, and if you grew up anywhere else, the name means nothing, which is exactly how regional food names work. It has nothing to do with Chinese chop suey, and everyone in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut understood that and did not care. Elbow macaroni, ground beef, canned diced tomatoes, green pepper, onion, and a pinch of sugar, combined raw in a casserole, covered and baked until the pasta absorbed the tomato broth and the beef cooked through. The sugar is the regional signature. Without it, the tomatoes stay sharp. With it, the whole dish mellows to something that tasted exactly like the school cafeteria, and the school cafeteria tasted like home. A 1938 New England food survey documented American chop suey as one of the most common weeknight dinners in working-class households from Portland to Providence. Somewhere in New England, on any given Tuesday, somebody's grandmother is still sliding the same covered dish into the same oven, calling it the same name, and not explaining it to anyone. Tuna noodle casserole got the fame, but the salmon noodle casserole fed just as many families and left far quieter when it went. The method was nearly identical: egg noodles, cream of celery soup, frozen peas, potato chip topping. But in place of tuna, went a can of pink salmon, flaked and folded through the noodles with a light hand. The salmon brought a slightly richer flavor, a faint oceanic depth that disappeared into the cream of celery and peas, but was present if you were paying attention. Nobody was paying attention. They were eating because it was 6:30 and the table was set, and this was what there was. When frozen fish portions and fast food arrived through the 1970s and 80s, canned salmon stopped being a pantry first choice, and this casserole quietly disappeared from weeknight rotations. One winter, she made it. The next winter, something else was in the dish. That was how it ended. Not with ceremony, just with a different can in a different hand. You started it the night before. That was the only rule anyone gave you, and if you forgot, the beans never softened right and everyone at the table knew. Dried navy beans soaked overnight, then buried in a low casserole under a smoked ham hock, sliced onion, 2 bay leaves, and enough broth to cover by an inch. Foil over the top, 300 degrees, 3 hours. The beans broke down at the edges while holding shape in the center. The collagen from the ham hock turned the broth silky, and the smoke spread through every bean in the dish. You pulled the hock out at the end and stripped every strand of meat back into the pot, because nothing left the kitchen that could still feed someone. During the Depression years, navy beans cost pennies per pound, and ham hocks were sold for almost nothing because nobody else wanted them. What nobody wanted became the thing that carried families through cold months, and the only skill it required was remembering to start it the night before. By the time the 1980s arrived, the old casserole logic had new ingredients to work with. Ground turkey had just become widely available, and backyard gardens that always produced more zucchini than anyone could eat in August now had a new place to send the surplus. Sliced zucchini goes in first, then raw ground turkey crumbled over it, then canned diced tomatoes drained lightly, then shredded mozzarella across the surface. No broth needed. The zucchini releases enough water as it bakes to steam everything above it. The turkey cooks in that steam, and the mozzarella melts into the tomatoes and pools at the edges. What most people spent August trying to get rid of became the entire liquid base of a casserole that fed a household for $3. That transformation, zucchini from garden pest to load-bearing kitchen staple, is what made this dish worth keeping once budgets got tight again. Swiss steak was the post-war answer to round steak, the toughest, cheapest cut on the board, priced accordingly. And the method was an act of patience. The round steak was dredged in flour and laid over sliced onion and whole canned tomatoes in a covered casserole, the tomatoes providing the acid to tenderize the meat and the liquid to braise it. 325 degrees, 2 hours, no checking, and no lifting the foil. By the time the lid came off, the flour coating had dissolved into the tomatoes to form a thick, rust-colored gravy, and the meat had collapsed to something that came apart at the touch of a fork. Post-war home economics guides from the 1940s and 50s specifically recommended Swiss steak as the clearest demonstration of how braising transformed an inexpensive tough cut into a centerpiece. The cut nobody wanted became the dish everyone asked for on Sunday, which is how most of the best food in this tradition ever got made. The name came from Luisa Tetrazzini, an Italian opera soprano so celebrated in the early 20th century that San Francisco held a free outdoor concert in her honor attended by thousands in the street. The dish named for her, spaghetti, chicken, mushrooms, cream sauce, parmesan, baked until golden, spread from hotel menus into home kitchens by the 1950s, where the cream sauce became a can of cream of mushroom soup and the parmesan became whatever hard cheese was on hand. Spaghetti broken to fit the baking dish, shredded chicken, cream of mushroom soup, a splash of pasta water, frozen peas, and cheese, baked, covered for 30 minutes, then uncovered for 15 to brown the top. You did not need to know who Tetrazzini was. You needed a dish, a can opener, and confidence that what came out would be better than what went in. And it always was. The recipe card is probably still in a drawer somewhere. Nobody has touched it since she died. Dry wild rice goes in raw, and that is the part most people find hardest to trust. Pouring uncooked wild rice, cold broth, and bone-in chicken into a covered dish, and believing the oven will sort it out. It will. Condensed French onion soup goes over the raw rice first, then enough additional chicken broth to total about 2 cups of liquid. Chicken pieces, skin side up. Foil sealed tight, 2 hours at 325 degrees. No opening. The rice has absorbed every drop of that onion-laced broth by then, each grain carrying the caramelized flavor all the way through. Wild rice has grown in the lake regions of Minnesota and the upper Midwest for thousands of years and was a staple food of Ojibwe communities long before it appeared in any community cookbook. The casserole version spread through Minnesota households in the 1960s and 70s, when canned French onion soup made the grain accessible to kitchens that had never worked with it. The broth is gone. The rice holds all of it. Bratwurst links, apple slices, and boxed stuffing in one covered baking dish. It sounds like someone emptied the refrigerator in October and called it dinner, which is almost exactly what happened. The dish belongs to the German-American tradition of pairing pork with fruit, a combination that ran through Midwestern households with German and Scandinavian roots from the 19th century onward. Bratwurst went in raw, nestled into dry stuffing mix with apple slices tucked around them, and enough chicken broth poured over the stuffing to hydrate it as it baked. Foil over the dish, 350, an hour. The apples softened to nearly sauce around the sausages. The stuffing absorbed the sausage fat and apple juice until it was dense and fragrant, and the bratwurst browned where the liquid did not reach. Her version went into the oven every October without fail. When October came the year after she was gone, the apple tree still had apples and nobody knew what to do with them. You did not need a name for this dish. You needed a baking dish, a few potatoes, an onion, and whatever loose ground pork the butcher sold at the end of the week for almost nothing. Thin sliced potatoes first, then raw ground pork crumbled across the top, then more sliced onion, salt, pepper, and a splash of whole milk. Foil tight, 300 for an hour and a half. The fat from the pork rendered down through the potato layers, the milk created a thin steam, and the layers compressed under the weight of the meat until the whole dish came out as one thing rather than 3 ingredients. This is the logic of peasant cooking in a casserole dish. The understanding that fat, starch, and moisture applied slowly and sealed will produce something richer than its parts suggest. During the Depression years and beyond, this was common in rural, Midwestern, and Southern households where every part of the animal was used and nothing that could still feed someone was discarded. Dirty rice gets its name from the way chicken livers and gizzards color the grain. The rice goes in white and comes out speckled and brown and smelling of something deep you cannot get from plain broth alone. The Cajun and Creole tradition of making rice dirty dates to the 19th century in Louisiana, built from the offal that wealthier households discarded and resourceful ones transformed into a foundation flavor. The dump and bake version, raw, converted rice, diced celery, chicken pieces on top, broth with cayenne and garlic, and a few chicken livers chopped small and scattered through the rice before the foil went on. 325, covered, 90 minutes. The livers dissolved almost entirely into the grain, leaving only the flavor behind. Dark and unmistakable to anyone who grew up eating it this way. She always put the livers in, and nobody asked, and the dish was always better for what they could not identify. You only find out after she is gone when you try to make it, and it does not taste the same. Hoover stew got its name from President Herbert Hoover during the worst years of the Depression, given to it by the people who had to eat it. Pasta, canned tomatoes, sliced hot dogs, and corn, dumped together into something that was less a recipe than a refusal to go hungry. Hoovervilles were the tent cities. Hoover blankets were the newspapers the homeless slept under. And Hoover stew was the cheapest possible meal made from the intersection of what was available and what was affordable. Dry elbow pasta, crushed tomatoes, sliced hot dogs, canned corn, and enough water to cook the pasta as it baked. Covered, 350, 40 minutes. The hot dogs stood in for beef nobody could buy. The pasta was the cheapest starch. The corn was the vegetable that survived. The people who ate this when they had no other choice are almost all gone, and the dish has gone nearly as quiet with them. What they made from almost nothing fed a generation through its worst years, and the least anyone can do is remember what it cost them. Day-old bread was not a problem in those kitchens. It was an ingredient. The loaf that had gone hard by midweek got torn into rough pieces and layered over soaked navy beans, diced onion, crumbled bacon, and enough chicken broth to reach the top of the bread layer in a covered casserole. 300 degrees, 90 minutes. The bread absorbed every drop of broth and rendered bacon fat as it baked, going from stale and dry to dense and custard soft at the center, while the top pieces went golden and slightly crisp where they stayed above the liquid line. The beans cooked through in the steam and braising liquid, and the whole dish came out tasting of something more deliberate than it was. This was the philosophy behind all of it. Nothing wasted, not even the bread that had stopped being bread. She tore it into that dish without measuring, knowing by feel when it was enough. That knowledge, the feel of it, the instinct for when enough was enough, does not survive the person who carried it. Most people who grew up eating sardine and rice casserole never told anyone outside the household, not because they were ashamed, but because it was the kind of dish that existed without commentary and without any expectation that anyone would ask. Canned sardines in tomato sauce, long-grain white rice, diced tomato, olive oil, garlic powder, dried parsley, and enough water to cook the rice as it baked. Covered, 350, 45 minutes. The sardines broke apart entirely as the dish cooked, their flesh disappearing into the rice until the only evidence was the tomato and oil flavor that saturated every grain. The Portuguese and Italian immigrant communities that carried this technique into American budget cooking through the early 20th century understood that the sardine was not the ingredient you apologized for. It was the flavor the dish was built on. She made it when the pantry was down to almost nothing, and it tasted like she had planned it from the start. That is the whole trick, and she never explained it. Ham, egg noodle, and cream casserole was the dish that appeared on your doorstep when someone died. Not because anyone planned it, there was no coordination, but because it was what you could assemble in 20 minutes from a pantry that always had a canned ham, a bag of egg noodles, and a can of cream of chicken soup. Egg noodles uncooked, cubed ham, cream of chicken soup, frozen peas, and a cup of milk. all stirred into a baking dish and covered with foil. 350, 45 minutes. In Southern and Midwestern communities throughout the 1950s and 60s, the custom of bringing food to the grieving was so established that every household kept the ingredients for a funeral casserole on hand without discussing it. She knew what it meant to receive this dish at your door. She had brought it often enough. When it arrived at her own door at the end, it tasted the way comfort food always does, not like what it was made of, but like the hands that brought it. 1 chicken thigh, a handful of frozen mixed vegetables, a tablespoon of butter, salt, pepper, garlic powder. Fold the foil into a tight packet, crimp the edges twice so no steam escapes, and set it in the oven at 400 degrees for 45 minutes. The foil packet method came from military field cooking during the Second World War, where individual sealed packets allowed soldiers to cook a complete meal without pots or pans. After the war, the technique moved into home cooking, always a stack of packets going into coals together, always several people at the fire. The single-serving version came later, quietly, when the children were grown and the house got quieter and the 9x13 pan stopped making sense. There is nothing sad about cooking for yourself. The butter melts into the vegetables. The chicken steams tender. The packet opens with a breath of hot steam that fills the kitchen the same way it always did. You are still cooking. That is the whole point. Oatmeal. Griddle cakes were born from the idea that nothing should go to waste, not even the cold pot of oatmeal left from breakfast. Cookbooks encouraged thrifty cooks to stir in a little flour, baking powder, and milk to form a thick batter that could be spooned onto a hot griddle. Within minutes, you had hearty cakes with a crisp outside and a tender inside. The beauty of this recipe was that it disguised leftovers as something entirely new. Families often topped them with syrup, molasses, or a pat of butter, and suddenly yesterday's porridge became today's satisfying lunch. These cakes were not only quick, but also surprisingly filling, which made them especially appealing during leaner times. For housewives looking to stretch every penny, turning scraps into something warm and comforting was not just resourceful, it was rewarding. This recipe captured that spirit perfectly. So here is a dish that you may not see coming or be prepared for, but it actually works really well this way too. We are talking about peanut butter jelly and banana toast, which is exactly what it sounds like. You take some toast, preferably toast until it's crunchy, then lather it with as much peanut butter and jelly as you desire, and layer it with sliced bananas. You may have only heard of that combo as a part of some protein shake or smoothie, but it works just as well sitting on top of bread as it does in a glass. This is also a perfectly refreshing option for when you are low on work, and grandmas obviously kept that in mind. When they could just tell that somebody in the household needed a sugar rush and a kick from behind to get them into high gear, they would feed them a lot more toast than was probably wise, but it would work every time. Quick tomato and rice soup was less of a recipe and more of a family habit. It started with canned tomato soup, the kind that came in a red and white can and waited patiently in your pantry for its moment. Instead of milk or water, Grandma would stir in leftover rice from the night before, just a scoop or two, enough to bulk it up and stretch it across the whole table. The rice gave it body, the soup gave it flavor, and together they made something more than the sum of their parts. It simmered on the stove while she folded laundry or paid bills at the kitchen table. It was the smell that told you dinner was ready, not the clock. No one complained that it was simple. In fact, that was the point. You could top it with cheese, swirl in a bit of cream, or eat it plain with saltines on the side. Whatever the case, it went down smooth, warmed you up fast, and made a long day feel less heavy. It might not win any ribbons, but it won over every empty stomach it ever met. Mock apple pie with crackers was one of the most clever Depression-era tricks to ever appear in print. When apples were scarce or expensive, cooks would take soda crackers, sugar, water, cinnamon, and lemon juice to recreate the flavor and texture of apple filling. The crackers softened in the syrupy mixture and remarkably resembled tender apple slices once baked. Covered with a simple pie crust, the result looked and tasted enough like real apple pie that many guests never suspected the difference. Best of all, it could be made in about 10 minutes of active work, since the filling came together on the stovetop in no time. Cookbooks praised it as a marvel of resourcefulness, and it became a household favorite during times when true fruit pies were out of reach. Few recipes show the ingenuity of old cookbooks better than this one. So our next dish comes with a bit of a history lesson that goes way further back than the time of our grandparents. Ham and cheese quesadillas may have been what they were binge-eating daily and serving up to us, but where did quesadillas ever come from? Apparently, they were not an American invention, and nobody could really find a solid name that they could credit with making the idea up first, until people did some history digging and found out that. Spanish settlers that tried their hand at taking over Central America in the very early days of the land brought Mexican culture with them. The rest, as they say, is history, and the people of the USA took to quesadillas very well. Especially easy variants like the ham and cheese one, which meant that you almost always had a snack that hit the taste buds just right and made you full too. The best part about quesadillas is that they are so quick to prepare and easy to make that you can enter Flavor Town in just 10-15 minutes, which is a pretty good sell for anybody. Convenient food is always the best after all. There were two things nearly every kitchen had back then: creamed corn and hot dogs. When both of them landed in the same skillet, dinner was practically done. This was the kind of meal Grandma made when time was short and kids were restless. She would slice the hot dogs into little coins and toss them into a buttered pan until they browned just right around the edges. Then came the creamed corn, thick, sweet, and silky from the can. It all got mixed together into a bubbling, golden mess that looked questionable to some but tasted like warm security. You could eat it on its own, spoon it over bread, or mop it up with the last slice of toast from breakfast. Nobody called it gourmet, but everyone called it dinner. It filled your belly, cleaned out the pantry, and gave you one less thing to worry about. And somehow, it was the meal that lingered in memory more than any roast or fancy casserole. Maybe it was the smell. Maybe it was how fast it came together. Or maybe it was just that it tasted better when you were young, hungry, and too impatient to wait for something fancier. Mock egg lemon soup was a Depression-era lifesaver that made its way into many family recipe cards and church cookbooks. The premise was simple. Instead of long-simmered chicken soup, you heated up a quick broth, whisked in eggs, and added a squeeze of lemon for brightness. The hot broth would cook the eggs almost instantly, creating silky strands that thickened the liquid without any flour or cream. In less than 10 minutes, you had a dish that tasted like comfort but cost next to nothing. Families appreciated the warm, tangy flavor on cold days, and since both eggs and lemons could stretch across several meals, this soup quickly became a favorite. Its Greek inspiration was often mentioned, but the thrifty American version was much lighter and faster. You could have a pot on the table in the time it took to set out the bowls, making it one of those resourceful recipes that never really went away. Who could ever resist pancakes? Since we are visiting the all-time classics which last even today in almost every child's diet and life, it would be a crime to go without mentioning Grandma's beloved fluffy pancakes. Did you ever wonder what made hers so much fluffier? Pancake houses across the nation seemingly met their match when confronted with a 60-something-year-old grandmother who loves to spend time obsessing over her grandkids. So what is it that home chefs discovered that several brands and franchises could not? There are a few tricks they would use, like letting the egg whites relax in the batter before cooking them, or having impeccable flipping skills so just the right amount of heat gets to each side. Some would just whisk and beat their eggs and batter so well that you got one supremely thick stack of pancakes. It seems the secret was simply the years of pancake-making experience that are hard to replicate. Cold dinners had a way of sneaking into the rotation, especially during sticky summers or long days when even boiling water felt like a chore. Cottage cheese and canned peach plates were Grandma's way of keeping things simple but still making it look like she tried. She would scoop a big spoonful of cottage cheese onto a plate, nestle a golden peach half beside it, and top the whole thing with a maraschino cherry if she was feeling fancy. Some people used lettuce as a bed. Others just reached for a fork and got to work. It was creamy, sweet, and oddly refreshing. The kind of combination you only appreciate once you grow up and remember it out of nowhere. The peaches added just enough syrupy sunshine, and the cottage cheese made sure you did not go to bed hungry. It was also what she served when she wanted to eat light but still feed the whole house. This was not a dinner that tried to win over picky eaters. It was a dinner that said, "This is what we have, and it will do just fine." And somehow, it did. Not every meal needed heat or noise. Some just needed quiet. Jell-O whip salad was a mid-century sensation that turned a box of gelatin into something creamy and light in almost no time at all. Housewives would prepare the gelatin, let it partially set, and then whip it together with chilled evaporated milk until it became fluffy. The result was a pastel-colored salad that could be dressed up with fruit or served plain. It was inexpensive, fun to look at, and quick enough to prepare for any gathering. Many cookbooks encouraged it as a safe dish for potlucks because it could be made ahead and transported easily. For families, it was a treat that required almost no cooking skills, yet looked impressive in a glass bowl. It captured the era's fascination with convenience foods while still managing to feel special. The creamy texture made it different from ordinary gelatin, which is why it remained so popular for decades. People have been putting things on top of crackers for centuries now, and enjoying it as a simple biscuit elevates meat, cheese, and just about anything else to a new height. Tuna salad with crackers was just one of many popular additions to the trend, and it is a fan favorite across the nation. Preparing the tuna salad takes a little time, but assembling it on crackers takes less than 10 minutes. Grandmas had so many recipes like this that they could just be made in a flash but would fill you up or be a kind of snack you have never had before on your own. Tuna salad on crackers is something you can make too just as easily, so give it a try if you ever have just biscuits and some tuna laying around. This one came straight out of the open the pantry and hope for a miracle school of cooking. Scrambled eggs with canned chili was never in any cookbook, but it made it onto plates across America faster than most 5-ingredient dinners. Grandma would beat a few eggs with whatever milk she had left, toss them in a skillet, and stir them just until they were barely set. Then came the chili, straight from the can, full of beans and spice and a little bit of mystery meat. It would warm right on top of the eggs until the kitchen smelled like a diner on a slow afternoon. A few slices of toast on the side, maybe a wedge of cheese if you were lucky, and you had yourself a meal. It was hearty, messy, and completely satisfying. No one asked what brand the chili was or whether the eggs were farm fresh. What mattered was that it was hot, filling, and on the table in 10 minutes. It was meals like this that made it possible to get through the rest of the week. And once you have eaten it once, you will understand why it never needed a recipe. Banana and sour cream salad might sound unusual today, but in the middle of the 20th century, it was a prized quick dish that often doubled as dessert. Cookbooks called for nothing more than slicing ripe bananas, layering them neatly on a plate, covering them with sour cream, and sprinkling the top with a dusting of sugar. In less than 10 minutes, you had a salad that was creamy, tangy, and sweet all at once. Housewives appreciated how it used just 3 ingredients, yet looked elegant enough for luncheons or church gatherings. Children enjoyed the sweetness, while adults saw it as a lighter alternative to heavier pies or cakes. What made it endure was how easy it was to scale. A single banana could serve one person, or several could fill a platter. It was also one of those recipes that made use of fruit before it spoiled, which was essential in thrifty kitchens. Buttered noodles are a dish so strongly associated with the elderly that they even have another name. Introducing Grandma's noodles, which were a staple of any family gathering back when simple dishes like this were still enough to leave a great impression on everyone at the table. The eggs made you feel great because they added a very warm feeling to the dish as well as being great for you. The butter itself was just the right touch that the dish needed and brought out the chewy sensation of the noodles so much more, and the overall flavor was something a mix between creamy chicken noodles and chicken cooked in butter, shredded and diced with vegetables. It screamed love in every sense of the word because it was a dish that took effort and, more than anything else, a lot of attention to detail to nail. But if that's the job, then there's no one better for it than the grandmas of the country. bologna and egg scramble was the go-to dinner when breakfast never quite happened and lunch was already a blur. It started with slices of bologna, thick and pink and curled at the edges, hitting the hot pan with a sizzle. Grandma would brown them until they crisped at the edges, then crack in a few eggs and give it all a quick scramble. No measuring, no garnish, just protein and grease and flavor. Sometimes she would add a little shredded cheese if she had some, but it was not necessary. This was about getting food on the table without making it a project. The bologna gave the eggs a smoky, salty edge, and the eggs softened everything just enough to go down easy. Served in bowls, over toast, or straight from the skillet, no one ever walked away hungry. It was simple, dependable, and tasted a whole lot fancier than it had any right to. You could make it in 10 minutes, clean up in 5, and be done with the day before the sun went down. Some meals were special because they were rare. This one was special because it was always there. Grapefruit halves with brown sugar were a breakfast table staple in the 40s and 50s, and they could not be simpler. Housewives would cut grapefruits in half, loosen the sections with a knife, sprinkle the tops with brown sugar, and place them under the broiler just long enough for the sugar to bubble. In less than 10 minutes, you had a dish that looked elegant, yet cost very little. The bitterness of the grapefruit paired with the sweetness of the caramelized sugar made for a refreshing start to the day. Many cookbooks praised this dish as a healthy option during a time when vitamins were heavily emphasized in advertising and diet culture. It also became popular as a light dessert for luncheons, adding a touch of sophistication without requiring any complicated preparation. With its bright color and quick assembly, this recipe was one of the easiest ways to impress with almost no effort. Cinnamon sugar toast is a delightful breakfast combo that was a go-to for grandmas not just for their kids and grandkids, but for their own mornings as well. Sometimes all you need from the world is a good toast and a healthy hit of glucose, and cinnamon sugar does that like nothing else. Cinnamon in particular started getting a lot more popular as an ingredient during the times most of our grandmas were alive, since a lot of bakeries started using it with maple syrup and vanilla, though it was always a popular choice. It is just that little variations in daily meals did not start popping up until the 1910s or 1920s. And since then, cinnamon has become a mainstay highlight of all things that scream USA food. American goulash light was less of a recipe and more of a formula. Meat, pasta, and tomatoes in whatever shape you could get. Elbow macaroni was the go-to because it cooked fast and filled up the pot. Grandma would brown a little ground beef, drain off the grease, and toss it with stewed tomatoes straight from the can. No sauce, no simmering, no drama. Sometimes she added a bit of onion or garlic salt, but usually it was just whatever she had on hand. The pasta would soak up the tomato juice until it was soft and tangy, and the beef added just enough flavor to make it stick to your ribs. Served in bowls with a sprinkle of grated cheese, if you were lucky, it was dinner. Fast. It was not the baked casserole version you see in magazines. This was goulash stripped down to its bones, made for people who needed food on the table in 10 minutes or less. And the best part? It was good. Really good. No breadcrumbs, no baking dish, no long prep. Just one skillet, one spoon, and a whole lot of knowing what mattered. That is how Grandma cooked. Shrimp wiggle was the kind of dish that perfectly captured the spirit of mid-century convenience cooking, and it was as charmingly simple as it sounds. Housewives looking to put something quick and satisfying on the table would open a can of shrimp, another can of peas, and stir both into a quick white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Once thickened, the whole mixture would be spooned generously over toast, biscuits, or even rice. What made this dish endure in old cookbooks was not only how inexpensive it was, but how much it looked like a true dinner, when in reality it took barely 10 minutes from start to finish. Children loved the creamy sauce and bright peas, while adults felt like they were eating something elegant thanks to the shrimp. The name itself added a little bit of fun, which made this meal a small morale booster in an otherwise frugal kitchen. Speaking of adding butter to the mix and elevating the dish, cheese has a pretty similar effect when you mix it with some scrambled eggs. It was one of the dreamiest breakfasts you could wake up to. the scent of freshly scrambled eggs forming a clear road that guided you to the kitchen, with each step taken increasing that early morning appetite. Once you sit, you are blessed with the glorious glow of cheese mixed with shining yolk and brilliant egg whites, scrambled to complete perfection mixed in with Grandma's special seasonings. That usually just meant a dash of paprika and oregano here and there. What was truly special, though, is how Grandma would manage to melt the cheese into the egg without compromising on how scrambled it was, which is an art lost to them now. Sloppy Joes had already earned their place in the American kitchen by the time Grandma figured out how to make them faster. Instead of hamburger buns, she grabbed slices of toast, whatever white sandwich bread was left in the bread box. Ground beef got tossed into the skillet with a little onion, then drowned in a quick mix of ketchup, mustard, and a pinch of sugar if you had it. No special seasonings, no packets, no fuss. Once the mixture was bubbling, it got spooned right over the toast and served just like that, open-faced, hot, and ready to fall apart in your hands. That was half the fun. It dripped, it stained your fingers, and it always tasted better the messier it was. This was a dinner for families who were too tired to sit proper but still wanted to eat together. It was loud, quick, and honest. And even though it came from a time of tight belts and short patience, it tasted like something you might pay good money for at a diner today. That is the thing about Sloppy Joe toast. It always fed more than just your stomach. Potato pancakes from Instant Mash proved that even convenience products could be reimagined into something homey and satisfying. Old cookbooks often suggested taking leftover mashed potatoes, or even instant ones prepared quickly, mixing them with an egg and a little flour, then frying them in a skillet until golden. In less than 10 minutes, you had crispy, comforting patties that worked for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. The beauty of this hack was how it turned something as simple as potato flakes into a versatile dish with real character. Families enjoyed topping them with sour cream, applesauce, or gravy, depending on what was available. For homemakers trying to save time while still offering variety, this recipe felt like a small victory. It proved that even shortcuts could deliver a dish that tasted just as good as traditional versions. Trying out your favorite ramen packet for the 1150th time this year for dinner? We get it, it is a pretty reliable option. Nothing hits that comfort food craving as well as ramen does. But did you know that back in the days of the early 1900s, when it was not so popular, most home chefs would spice up ramen with some basic additions that are so common today that almost everybody uses it as a default now? We are talking about ramen with eggs, which is something that you may be so used to seeing in every TikTok and short reel on Insta these days, but it did not always used to be like that. Home chefs were the ones who started the trend of adding things to your ramen, spicing it up and seeing what works and what does not. We have to thank them because they definitely hit gold with it. Spam and cabbage was the kind of meal that did not sound like much but got the job done, and then some. Grandma would slice the spam into thick chunks and toss it into a hot pan until the edges crisped and curled. Then came the shredded cabbage, sizzling as it hit the fat, softening in the salt, and soaking up every bit of flavor. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of sugar if she felt like balancing things out. That was it. No special tools, no hard steps. But the kitchen always smelled like something better than it should have. The cabbage turned silky. The spam, golden and caramelized. You could eat it on its own or pile it over mashed potatoes or rice if you had extra. For many, it was a depression holdover. For others, it was just what you made when payday was still a few days away. It was salty, hearty, and fast. The holy trinity of Grandma's weekday dinners. And for all the jokes people made about spam, no one left hungry. You might laugh at the idea now, but back then, this was dinner you could trust. Quick escalloped tomatoes was one of those recipes that appeared in nearly every community cookbook because of its low cost and speed. The instructions were straightforward. Open a can of tomatoes, stir them with breadcrumbs, butter, and a pinch of sugar, then bake them just until hot and bubbling. In 10 minutes flat, you had a side dish that stretched canned goods into something hearty and flavorful. Families served it alongside meats or with slices of bread, and it quickly became a way to make canned vegetables feel more like a proper meal. The texture of soft tomatoes and crunchy crumbs gave it appeal, while the butter made it feel more indulgent than it really was. For many households, this was the kind of recipe that bridged the gap between practicality and comfort, proving that even with limited ingredients, flavor could still shine. There really is nothing like a grilled cheese sandwich, a meal that you have seen in the media, in kitchens, all over neighborhoods, in stalls and diners, and just about everywhere else. Sometimes you are in too much of a rush to make anything proper, or you just might only have some cheese and bread on hand. Everyone still needs to eat, but does that mean we have to wash down something we do not even like the taste of? No! And the popularity of grilled cheese sandwiches is a testament to that. But how did these sandwiches get so popular? Well, most Americans can only remember them as a loving meal that their grandmother would make in times exactly like what we described. The best part is that regardless of what kind of bread or cheese you like, every combo works just as well, which is something we cannot say about many dishes. Grilled cheese and pineapple sandwiches were one of Grandma's best-kept secrets, the kind of meal that made you raise an eyebrow right before you fell in love with it. It started like any grilled cheese, with slices of bread and whatever cheese was available. But right before the second slice went on, she would place a canned pineapple ring right in the middle of the sandwich. Then it all went into the skillet with butter hissing underneath. The cheese melted, the pineapple softened, the bread crisped to a golden crunch. The end result? A sandwich that was both savory and sweet, crispy and juicy. It was like dinner and dessert in one bite, and it somehow worked better than anyone expected. She made it on Fridays, or on days when the pantry was almost bare, but the craving for something different was strong. The smell of warm pineapple and browned butter filled the house and lingered even after the dishes were done. Kids loved it. Grown-ups pretended they did not, until they asked for seconds. It was quick, clever, and full of unexpected joy. Just like her. Ham and pickle relish. Sandwich spread is another reminder of how cookbooks leaned heavily on economy and speed. All it took was grinding up leftover ham, mixing it with a few spoonfuls of sweet pickle relish, and binding it all together with mayonnaise or mustard. In under 10 minutes, you had a spread that could be layered onto bread, stuffed into rolls, or served with crackers. It turned small scraps of meat into something filling, and the relish added enough tang to disguise the fact that the portion of ham was very small. This recipe became especially popular in wartime cookbooks when stretching protein was essential. Families enjoyed the bright, savory flavor and the convenience of having a ready-to-serve sandwich filler. It was perfect for school lunches or quick suppers, and many people still recall this as a nostalgic favorite from their childhood kitchen tables. Grandma Olpa's apple pie is a classic that only grandmothers are aware of or know how to make, despite it being pretty simple. It's something you could make on your own, but you likely wouldn't achieve the same level of finesse. Apple pies like this one are typically filled with plenty of apples, topped with a lattice crust, and smothered in thick, rich applesauce. It would often make for the best Thanksgiving pie you could have, and they would certainly keep making it every time the holiday season came knocking. The mixture of butter sugar on the top as well as the sauce makes it unforgettable if you try it for the first time, and it is addictive enough to keep making you come back for more. This is also a recipe that grandmothers were fond of passing on. This was not just a baked bean and hot dog dinner. This was the working family's answer to hunger, chaos, and a kitchen clock that never slowed down. Grandma would take a can of baked beans, thick, sweet, and molasses dark, and heat it slowly on the stove. Then came the franks, sliced into coins and tossed in until they plumped up like little balloons. Sometimes she would add a spoonful of brown sugar or a shake of mustard, but most nights she just stirred and served. It was hot, sticky, smoky, and completely effortless. The beans coated the franks like syrup over pancakes, and it went best with a buttered slice of toast or a side of cornbread if the oven was already warm. Kids would gobble it down in minutes. Grown-ups would sigh, eat quietly, and go back for seconds. It was the kind of stovetop magic that made do with what you had and somehow made it taste better than it should. You never forgot the smell. And even if you rolled your eyes when she made it, you would ask for it again once life got harder and you needed something easy. That is what made it a keeper. Cucumber and sour cream salad was one of those fast dishes that found its way into nearly every old cookbook because it required so little effort and always tasted refreshing. Thin slices of cucumber were tossed in a dressing made from sour cream, sugar, and a splash of vinegar or lemon juice to give it balance. The sweet and tangy mixture clung to the crisp cucumber slices, making the salad both cooling and creamy. In summer months, it was often served straight from the icebox, which gave it even more appeal. Housewives appreciated how quickly it came together, often in less than 10 minutes, and how it could stretch a garden's worth of cucumbers into a dish that seemed more substantial. Families liked it as a side with roast meats or sandwiches, and it often appeared at picnics or potlucks because it traveled well in jars. The salad's popularity came from its thrift as much as its taste, since cucumbers were cheap and sour cream was often at hand. It was simple, satisfying, and a little bit special without being complicated. There are times where you just absolutely do not feel like getting up and doing anything, and in those times, microwaving some mac and cheese can be really helpful. We are sure most of us have memories of spending the nights at our grandparents' and waking up to some mac and cheese in the microwave, or coming home from school to a bowl that you could lose your worries in. The cheesier it was, the happier a kid would be after eating it, and even at this adult stage of life, a hot bowl can bring all those memories flooding right back in. Mac and cheese started growing in popularity when Mississippi farm families adopted it as a regular meal, and from there onwards it spread to a lot of families everywhere across the states. We thank God for that little fact every day, since we do not know what we would do without it. These kitchens are quiet now, and the people who filled them carried most of what they knew straight out the door with them. Tell us in the comments which one of these you are making this week, and whose kitchen you learned it from.